Welcome and good evening. I'm Archana Venkatesan. I'm going to move this. The Interim Director of the Davis Humanities Institute. And it's really my pleasure to welcome you all to the culmination of a week spotlighting the contributions and achievements of the Punjabi community to the building of California, the Sacramento region, and our very own UC Davis. Designed as part of the Davis Humanities Institute's year-long public humanities initiative on the theme of cultivation, Punjabi Week, the first such series of events focused on Punjabi immigrants undertaken on any campus in the United States. I'm so proud of that fact. It has showcased Gurbani Sangeet, Punjabi foodways, the invisible labor of Punjabi immigrants in the meatpacking industry, and so much more. Today, we conclude on a high note with the celebration of the path-breaking legacy of Dr. Gurdev Khush and the gift of his papers to the UC Davis Library's archives and special collections. Adding to the pioneering Punjabi digital archive, the Khush papers now distinguish our library's wide-ranging collection of the history of Punjabi immigrants in California and make it an archive rivaling that of UC Berkeley. We'll hear more about our special collections and Dr. Khush's papers this evening, as well as from Dr. Khush himself. We are delighted that we are joined this evening by Dean Attakwana, Chancellor May, Dr. Khush's esteemed colleague and fellow Rice researcher Pam Reynolds, and Dr. Kevin Miller. Thank you all for making the time. I know how busy this time of the quarter is. Before I turn the mic over to Dean Attakwana and invite her to the podium, a word about the event. As we do not want to interrupt the flow of speakers with individual introductions, each speaker will simply follow the next. I invite Dean Attakwana to the podium to kick off our celebrations.
Good evening, and so wonderful to see all of you here. So thank you so much, Archana, for that introduction. Today we are gathered to recognize and honor the dedication of Dr. Khush's papers to the UC Davis Library's special collection. It has been said that hunger is not an issue of charity, but of justice. Through that lens, we can view Dr. Khush's work not just as a product of a brilliant geneticist, but as documentation of a crusade led by a committed citizen. Faculty papers, rare books, archives, and manuscript collections are crucial to original research in the humanities and increasingly in social sciences and STEM subjects. Among the dozens of photographs of world leaders, scientists, and trainees, voluminous scientific and field notes, and correspondence from top plant scientists, many of whom were Davis faculty, there are precious notebooks handwritten by the professor himself. These field notes are primary sources of the rice training programs he led throughout the developing rice-growing world in about 70 countries. In these pages, researchers can first-hand knowledge of the priorities, challenges, and successes of Professor Khush and his team introduced over 300 new higher-yield, disease-resistant varieties of rice to China, Japan, Iran, Vietnam, India, Pakistan, and elsewhere. The papers contain rich knowledge and insights and build on our growing collection about the history of early Punjabi farmers in our special collections and in the digital pioneering Punjabi's digital archive. So consider for a moment that when the world faces questions about how we might feed our people, those charged with answering such questions will turn to UC Davis for answers. Gurdev and Harwand, we are truly grateful for your gift, your work, and your passion for serving those in need. So thank you. And I'm going to invite Chancellor May to the podium.
Good evening, and thank you, Dean Attakwana, and hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here to honor the legacy of Professor Gurdev Khush, someone truly deserving of acknowledgement and praise for his many contributions to UC Davis and indeed the world. You may know Professor Khush as one of the heroes of the Green Revolution in rice. He is best known for his work at the International Rice Research Institute, where he led efforts to create new high-yield rice varieties. During his 35-year career at the International Rice Research Institute, he developed more than 300 innovative rice strains, including IR36, the most widely planted food crop in the world. His work is credited with dramatically increasing the global rice supply. He received the 1996 World Food Prize for his achievements in increasing and improving the global supply of rice during a time of enormous population growth in the developing world. Professor Khush retired at UC Davis in 2002 as an adjunct professor emeritus in the Department of Plant Sciences. Over the course of his career, he has received nearly every award in his field. 5 years ago, I had the pleasure of presenting him with the UC Davis Medal, our university's highest honor. Professor Khush is a great example of the global reach of Punjabi Americans who have been leaders in science and other professions. Today, we celebrate a notable gift to UC Davis and the Shields Library, donated by Professor Khush and his wife, Harwant. They have generously donated a collection of papers and other materials that supplement his published research. The collection includes correspondence, speeches, travel notebooks, scrapbooks, photographs, and more. For students and scholars of agronomy, plant sciences, and related disciplines, these materials provide a unique view into the work of one of the world's top agricultural scientists. The collection will also be a valuable resource for those in the humanities and humanistic social sciences as they examine the history of science and global history of food. Of course, it will also be invaluable to the history of Punjabi Americans and their contributions to California, our campus, and to our communities. UC Davis is the right home for this collection. This work builds on the historical accounts of Punjabi Americans at UC Davis. One of the earliest accounts of the Punjabi farming presence in the Sacramento Valley came from the diaries and account books of a Davis farmer named George Pierce, Jr. Pierce is known for having successfully lobbied the regents to build the University of California's farm school, then known as Davisville. Now we have a different name. Pierce was one of the largest almond growers in California at the turn of the 20th century, but he had a problem recruiting a steady labor force and maintaining a high quality of work. In 1907, the Punjabi immigrants solved the growers' problem by providing him a reliable supply of field workers from the Punjab region. This farm labor community lasted until 1920, but decades later, Punjabi Americans returned to Davis with an entirely different presence. Beginning in the 1950s and especially during the 1970s, Punjabis and other South Asians of diverse regional and religious backgrounds returned to Davis as students and faculty members at UC Davis, and that trend continues. UC Davis is richer for the contributions of faculty members like Professor Khush. I'm honored to be here today to celebrate you and your generous donation. Gurdev and Harwant, on behalf of the UC Davis community, thank you for this wonderful contribution to UC Davis and to the South Asian community. We are gratefully acknowledging that you have decided to share your extraordinary story and body of work through a wealth of diaries, documents, and photos. These historical documents will carry on your legacy and be a cherished resource for students and scholars here for years to come. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Archana and others for organizing this event. It's truly a great honor and privilege to help celebrate Gurdev's career today. During the time that he helped build the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines into the success that it is today, he supported many researchers by patiently explaining his work, answering our questions, introducing us to other scientists to set up important collaborations, and always inspiring us with his grace, knowledge, and kindness. You will hear and have heard about his many contributions, and you will hear more in the next talk. But here I wanted to simply give you a sense of how he helped guide my career from the start and how he has helped many people. As an undergraduate, I was fascinated with the intimate connections that form between plants and microbes. I wanted to know more about how plants recognize and respond to infection. At that time, breeders were breeding for resistance very effectively. They'd been doing it for more than 100 years. In fact, today, virtually everything we eat carries genes for resistance. Yet, despite their importance, we did not understand how the plant and microbe could sense and respond to each other. So when I began my postdoc at Cornell, many scientific technologies were taking off, including DNA sequencing and gene isolation from large genomes, such as rice, and really giving researchers for the first time opportunity to understand these interactions at the molecular level. I wanted to work on rice because it feeds half the world's people. My postdoctoral advisor at Cornell, Steve Tanksley, told me that the famous geneticist, Gurdev Khush, had just developed a rice breeding line that contained a resistance gene with an unusual property. It was resistant to all known strains of a serious bacterial pathogen that caused bacterial blight disease of rice. The trait, which Gurdev named XA21, had been discovered in a wild species of rice by researchers in Mali. Gurdev and his team carried out a wide cross to introduce the XA21 gene into varieties grown by farmers in Asia. Steve encouraged me to go visit Gurdev at the International Rice Research Institute, so I did. I remember the day well. I was timid because I did not know many famous scientists, and I certainly didn't know much about breeding new varieties of rice from wild species. Really, all I had going for myself was a lot of enthusiasm. Gurdev offered me a chair, and we began a wonderful conversation about rice genetics, breeding, plant microbe interactions, and the future of agriculture. At the end of our meeting, I was completely relaxed, thanks to Gurdev, and delighted to have had the chance to meet such a wonderful person and scientist. Before I left, Gurdev generously gave me a bag of XA21 seed that he and his team had developed. Well, that seed packet launched my career. I planted the seeds at Cornell and then here at UC Davis, and eventually my team discovered that the trait named XA21 that Gurdev had identified encoded a single gene that could recognize a small protein that was conserved in many different bacterial strains. I'm still working with XA21 today and still loving it. Thank you very much. So Gurdev, your thoughtful approach to science, unwavering support for researchers from around the world, and scientific rigor is really a true inspiration for any researcher or team leader like myself. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ronald. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Kevin Miller. I'm the head of archives and special collections here at the UC Davis Library. You'll find us just beyond those windows. That's where we steward the library's rare books, manuscripts, archival collections, both print and digital. In addition to serving students, faculty, and researchers, we also are open to the general public. As the library's representative, I welcome you to Shields Library and invite you to return. While the library's main circulating collection of books, periodicals, and electronic resources are critical to supporting the university's mission of teaching, research, and clinical care, the archives and special collections are here for those ready to go deep. The undergraduate taking their first steps into original research. The scholar examining an illuminated manuscript from the 13th century. The instructor bringing her students to our classroom to view photographs and ephemera from the camps of Japanese incarceration during World War II, to hold these things in their hands. We steward the rare, the one-of-a-kind, the raw materials of history, and the primary sources of scholarship. It is our distinct honor to add the Gurdev Singh Khush papers to our archives and special collections. So thank you, Dr. Khush, for your generous donation. We have, by the way, images that are going into the archives on display on the monitor. So I won't take any offense at all if your head turns that way during my talk. A scholar's papers provides context and evidence for his or her published works and professional activities, often providing materials for restudies and further studies. Additionally, there's an element of biography, and a good papers collection will tell a story. And as we've already heard this evening, Dr. Khush's story is one of dedication, perseverance, innovation, and bounty, and his papers reflect that. They tell his story. When we bring in a personal papers collection like Dr. Khush's, we tend to respect the creator's way of organizing the materials, since this tends to reflect his or her workflows, priorities, way of thinking, and creativity. We do, however, spend a lot of time rehousing the materials into preservation quality boxes and folders, and we store the collections, of course, in our secure climate-controlled facilities. We also create detailed online catalogs called finding aids that facilitate the discovery and access to the collection, which we serve up to patrons in our dedicated reading room. Ideally, if we have the funds, we digitize critical portions of the collection, pushing materials online to a truly global research community. The UC Davis Library owes a debt to Nicole Ranganath for connecting us with Dr. Khush and facilitating the donations of his papers. In 2016, Dr. Ranganath spearheaded the remarkable Pioneering Punjabis Digital Archive in collaboration with the Punjabi American Historical Society. I'm pleased to say the library was among the partners on this project, and our digital collections continue to serve as the repository for the scanned photographs, diaries, correspondence, newspaper clippings, and other documents that resulted from the project. It was through the Pioneering Punjabis project that a handful of Dr. Khush's material first came to the UC Davis Library, including many of the photos you see in the slideshow. Now let's talk about what's in Dr. Khush's papers. Working with Dr. Khush has been a dream because he's so well organized. I arrived at his home office to find neatly divided piles of folders, binders, and scrapbooks that he had divided into the following categories. And Hervan may have had a lot to do with that, I guess. So the categories were correspondence, award letters and congratulatory letters, newspaper clippings, dinner invitations, pamphlets, trip reports, trip notebooks, speeches, photographs, and videos. It's a very rich collection. I'd like to focus here on 3 items from his papers that exemplify the collection and represent different points in his life and career. As I mentioned, the Good Papers contains an element of biography beyond the subject's professional life. I had asked Dr. Khush for some family photographs from his early years in India because his origins, family, and Punjabi heritage so clearly remained touchstones throughout his career. One of my favorite photos from this period shows Dr. Khush as a young man, about 22 years old, bedecked in garlands and poised to leave Punjab for opportunities in England. He is surrounded by who I imagine are family and friends. His arms rest at his side, and he stares firmly into the camera. His story is the story of many Punjabis in the 20th century. His grandfather died in the 1918 influenza pandemic. A great uncle was killed fighting for the British in World War I. As a teenager, Dr. Khush experienced both the joys of India's independence and the horrors of partition. Now, through hard work and perseverance, he stands in this photograph at the threshold of a new experience, immigration. As we know, Dr. Khush ultimately attended UC Davis for graduate school, earning his PhD in 1960, under the guidance of his mentor, pioneering plant geneticist G. Ledyard Stebbins. By the way, Dr. Khush's papers will be in good company because we also have the Stebbins papers in archives and special collections. A postdoctoral position led to 7 more years at UC Davis, mapping and exploring the tomato genome with Charles Rick before Dr. Khush accepted his position at the International Rice Research Institute, or IRRI, in the Philippines, where he would spend the majority of his career. The second item that I'd like to highlight is a letter from Dr. Stebbins to Dr. Khush, written in December 1967, the year that Dr. Khush had started his appointment at IRRI. In the letter, Dr. Stebbins shows his continued support and makes a prediction that proves prophetic. He writes, "I was most interested to receive your letter of November 30 and to learn about your research. In a way, it's too bad you can't do more basic work. On the other hand, the practical breeding which you and your colleagues are carrying out at Manila is potentially as important for the future of human society as any work which is being done anywhere in the world. He goes on to say, perhaps when your station has made some major contributions, you will be able to relax and take up theoretical work again. I think you had to wait quite a while for that. Well, we've heard this evening of those major contributions that Dr. Khush and his team would go on to make, and the bounty that innovative work brought to the world. During the course of his career at Erie and afterwards, Dr. Khush traveled to dozens of countries. He kept handwritten notes during these travels, and these trip notebooks are in the collection. As our third item, I'll take one of these as an example from 1998. I'm not sure where he was when he wrote these musings, but he appears to be recording thoughts for an upcoming conference, paper, or article on the ethics of biotechnology. He writes, and I hope this doesn't embarrass you, he writes, just as the food requirements of today's population of 6 billion could not have been met by the technologies of the 1940s, we cannot assume that current practices will feed the population of 8 billion expected in 2020, end quote. By the way, thank you, Dr. Khush, for your nice legible handwriting, which is not guaranteed in personal papers. Dr. Khush continues, biotechnology will further green revolution into evergreen revolution, adding, it is appropriate to call it gene revolution as it focuses on a single trait improvement at a time, end quote. It's a little play on words there. So Dr. Khush was nearing the end of his tenure at Erie when he wrote that 25 years ago and would soon return to UC Davis as adjunct professor in the Department of Plant Sciences, a position he held until his retirement in 2017. His academic legacy includes 3 books, numerous edited works and scientific papers, and at least 50 graduate students that he mentored. Add to that list the Gurdev S. Khush papers, which now have a home in the UC Davis Library. You know, one thing I love about my job is meeting our faculty, learning about their research and the impact they've had on their students and their disciplines. Dr. Khush, it's been a real pleasure to meet you and an honor, and I thank you and Harvent for the generous donation of your papers. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? So I am Nicole Rangana, the professor in the Middle East South Asia Studies program here at UC Davis. And it's my distinct honor to have this conversation with Professor Khush, who has been, you know, like a mentor, a saint, a guiding light, really, as we've developed the Punjabi program here at UC Davis. And from the first day, just like, you know, Professor Ronald spoke about coming to his office, you know, I just had an idea about how to begin the Punjabi program, and I went to him first, and he couldn't have been more encouraging, you know, and every step of the way he lent his support, and without him, we wouldn't be able to have developed the Punjabi program. And so I think the community has so much to feel grateful for to him. But I thought we would take the opportunity today to kind of glean some of your personal reflections. Here you are reflecting back on what is an astounding, you know, life's work and legacy. And so I'd like to ask you to share with us your memories. And the first I'd like to ask you about is, you know, you grew up in humble circumstances in a village in Jalandhar in Punjab. And somehow you had the courage and the determination and the inspiration to travel halfway around the world to come to UC Davis to start your doctoral work. So what were your first impressions when you arrived here in Davis in 1957?
Thank you, Nicole. When I came to Davis in August 1957, UCD was a very small college. It was so small that we knew most of the faculty members. There were only 2,000 students. Davis had a population of 600,000. And I started looking at the campus with a lot of interest. All the research and teaching buildings were located around the quad. There used to be one big recreation room where the student union is located now. It used to be a barn. It was converted into recreation center. And we used to have celebrations in that building, which was demolished, and now we have the student union there. My office was in genetics department, and genetics department had 3 faculty and 5 graduate students. The department was located in the 2nd story of Animal Science building, which is now called Halt Hall, H-A-R-T, Halt Hall. This Animal Sciences building also had the offices for the animal scientists. Many scientists used to come to consult these scientists from different parts of California and visit with the faculty, so as to facilitate their coming to the offices where they needed to go. These offices were labeled horses, cows, and sheep. The next 2 offices were for men, next was for the women. So these visitors during the picnic days, they used to come and sort of get amused by seeing these rooms in that particular sequence. So one of these visitors put a big sign on the next office. He wrote convertible. So that was one of my memories of Animal Science building, and it was wonderful to have a small department with a small number of students, and it was just next to the library, which is the so important resource of the university.
Thank you for sharing that with us. The other question I want to ask you is that rice is not a traditional crop that's grown in Punjab. So after you completed your doctoral work in just 3 years in 1960, having also mastered like German and French, I believe, just to gain admission into UC Davis, then you completed your postdoctoral work, and then you embarked on your career at the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines. How much experience did you have in rice breeding when you arrived in the Philippines?
Well, actually, when I grew up in Punjab, there was no rice grown at all. And it was grown in small areas along the riversides. So I started working on tomato genetics after finishing a PhD. And I really enjoyed that work with Professor Charles Rick. So when I moved to Philippines, it was an entirely new crop. I did not know much about rice, but it was a challenge. The challenge was that the population of the world at that time was increasing very rapidly, but the food production was stagnant. Most of the varieties were rather low yielding. And rice feeds half the world population. 90% of the rice is grown and consumed in Asia. So this addressed the problem of food insecurity. The Rockefeller and Ford Foundation established a center of excellence for rice research. So when I joined the Rice Institute, there were about 25 scientists at that time. Very small, but very dedicated group. So our challenge was to develop the rice varieties with increased yield potential. That was the first focus, so that the food production could be increased. Normally, when you do the crop breeding, you increase the yield potential incrementally by 1 or 2% every year. But we were so lucky that developed the varieties which had double the yield potential of the varieties which were grown at that time. So that was a very good achievement. To take the example, when the farmers were growing old varieties, they used to get 1 to 3 tons per hectare. With the new varieties, they could get 5 to 6 tons per hectare. So it was so innovative technology that it was adopted very, very widely. So within 15 to 20 years, every acre was planted to improved rice varieties. That was probably the most widely or most quickly adopted technology, agricultural technology anywhere. So the food production, rice production particularly, increased from 2 million tons in 1960 to 4 million tons in 1980 and 6 million tons in year 2000. So that produced enough food, and the cost of rice went down by 30% because there was abundant rice, the cost of production was less, and so the food became abundantly available. This helped the poor segment of society who spend 50 to 60% of their income on food grains. So with this breakthrough, there was a food security, poverty alleviation, the environmental sustainability, and general development. That was the impact of so-called Green Revolution. Then Green Revolution term was coined by William Gord of USAID after seeing the impact of rice and also of wheat developed by Dr. Borlaug in Mexico. So that was the Green Revolution, which helped so much in improving the world.
Hello, can you hear me clearly? Yes, okay. As a historian, one of the items that was of greatest interest to me in seeing all of the materials that you're donating to the library were the handwritten notebooks you wrote in over 50 countries in which you conducted training programs throughout the developing world, really all of the rice-growing countries. And I wonder if you could share with us, I remember talking to you once and you shared a story that you actually conducted a training program in Vietnam at the height of the American-Vietnam War. So there must have been just extraordinary challenges as you completed these training programs. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your experiences, in Vietnam or any other country you think that illustrate, some of the challenges you faced training farmers and scientists on growing these new varieties of rice?
Well, when IRI was established, at that time there were very few agricultural scientists in Asia. So one of the focus of our institute was to bring the rice scientists for training at IRI. They would spend 6 months to a year. Some studied for degree programs, and IRI trained a lot of scientists. And up to now, for example, IRI has trained 25,000 scientists in rice research in various areas. So I had the good fortune of training more than 100 rice breeders. And one of the payment or payoff of these training program was that we developed the collaborative projects in all these rice varieties with these scientists who had returned back. So I used to visit many of these countries to work with former trainees and other scientists. So in early part of March 1975, I went to Vietnam. After looking at some rice stations in Mekong Delta, we went to one valley in the mountains, and there I was looking at upland rice. After looking at this upland rice, I came back to Saigon and came back to IRI. About 1 week later, I read the news that the North Vietnamese army has moved into that valley called Van Me To. And news came immediately that this army is now poised to attack Saigon. And that's what happened. It was pandemonium. People were leaving Vietnam, whatever means they could. And I was so lucky that I got out of Vietnam about 10 days before what happened.
So you played a lead role in the Green Revolution, in which you were, made substantial contributions to the greatest challenge that was facing the world at that time, which was, how to feed the world's people with a burgeoning population. So what lessons did you learn from the Green Revolution that might be useful as we face, today's great challenge, which is climate change?
Well, one thing which is very important is that we worked with all the countries irrespective of any ideology, whether you were in the Western camp or Eastern camp or communist countries, we worked with every country. Then the support for our work came after the Green Revolution, or when the Green Revolution started, and many donor countries started supporting us. Before Institute was started by 2 foundations, then few countries like USAID and UK came for support. When then finally almost 35 countries started making the donations to IRI, including Japan, which were not very happy in the beginning because Japan had all the knowledge about rice. And they said, what do these guys know about rice when we have everything there, Then they became our biggest supporters financially because they found out that when the farmers can buy the cars, the motorcycles, and the other equipment for their house, they were the biggest beneficiaries. So they started giving the support to IRI at one time, 30% of the budget was coming from Japan. That was really remarkable. So I think regarding your question about the climate change, it's the biggest challenge for humanity now. So we have to follow some of those examples of green revolution, work with every country should support it, no matter what your ideology, and should come support the work on controlling this climate change liberally. I think that's probably the best example you can learn from the Green Revolution.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your reflections with us this evening. And thank you so much for this generous donation to UC Davis. Professor Khush.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Khush and Professor Ranganath, for such a wide-ranging and illuminating conversation, and a reminder once again about the challenge of climate change, that it's hard to imagine it on such a beautiful day, but we are on the precipice of it. So thank you for reminding us that collaboration is something that is essential if we are to confront this global challenge. But on that note, thank you so much to all of you for joining us for this very special evening commemorating the very generous donation of Dr. Khush's papers to the UC Davis Library. I want to take this opportunity to once again thank Chancellor May, Dean Attakwana, and Professor Pam Ronald for speaking so evocatively about Dr. Khush. Thank you to Kevin Miller for giving us a glimpse into the richness of the Khush papers. I hope that many people in the audience, especially students, will seek these papers out for research. A heartfelt thanks to Professor Nicole Ranganath for her vision, her energy, her dedication to supporting all things Punjabi related. And especially for bringing the idea of Punjabi Week to the DHI early in the fall. Look for a short article by Professor Ranganath on the contributions of the Punjabi immigrants to UC Davis in the DHI's annual newsletter to be published in June of this year. Also look for the DHI podcast, which features an interview with Professor Ranganath as well as an interview with Professor Gurdev Khush. Look for it on the DHI website. We are grateful to the Office of the Chancellor and Provost, the College of Agriculture, Global Affairs, the Robert Mondavi Institute, and the Library for their contributions that have made this event possible. To the wonderful planning team at the Library, Portia Green and Jessica Nussbaum, it's been an absolute pleasure working with you. And last but not least, to Morgan Monferrat, the DHI's backbone, who planned every detail of this event with such thought, care, precision, and patience. The hugest thank you. It's been an absolute honor and joy to work with you. With that said, I invite you all to enjoy the wine that's been donated by Berryessa Gap Vineyards and all the wonderful spread. So thank you so much, and please enjoy your evening.